And Tennessee Congressman Tim Burchett is joining us right now here on Morning on Merritt Street. He is also a member of the House Oversight Committee. Congressman, good morning. So glad you're with us this morning.
Thank you all for having me, ma'am.
You know, in that tweet we referenced when you said there is a culture problem at the Secret Service, you've been very critical on how the Secret Service has been responding to this ongoing investigation, saying they are not cooperating with this investigation. What do you mean by that? And why are you saying this is not a funding problem when the acting director just asked for more money, rather a culture problem?
Well, first of all, in Washington, D.C., ma'am, that's what they always do. They always ask for more money and they'll fix it. And our attention span in Congress is a lot like America. You know, we want our pizzas in 30 minutes or less, and that's about the time of our attention. We'll move on to some bright, shiny object somewhere else. We'd already stopped talking about the first assassination attempt when the second one had occurred. So it's pretty clear to me they're trying to run the clock. But you remember Stephanie Cheadle was the former director, and it was just pitiful. The question, we were asking her softball questions and she couldn't answer, wouldn't answer, didn't know the answer. And then we replace her with the number 2 man, who obviously has come up through the ranks like her, political appointee mostly. And you see exactly, you get the same exact dadgum results. And we just can't, it's just not worth it. And also the Secret Service, a lot of people don't realize, a large component of their job is counterfeit bills. You know, they go out and identify those and apprehend people that are counterfeiting and things like that. They ought to move that over to Treasury and just say Secret Service is just going to be security details for dignitaries that come in this country and elected officials and former elected officials. You also have to realize the head man down in Miami was told to erase his Twitter account because he put a lot of anti-Trump stuff out there. Now, that's the guy who's allegedly supposed to risk his life to protect President Trump if he were to come in his jurisdiction. So you got a lot of questions there, and we're not getting really any answers. And all they're trying to do is run out the clock till this election cycle's over, and they hope they beat Donald Trump. I don't think they will. But if they do, you're just going to see more of this type of activity. And it is DEI, ma'am. You shouldn't have somebody head and shoulders shorter than the person that they're guarding. And they've continued to do that. In the first assassination attempt, you saw one agent couldn't get their gun in their holster. I wasn't as much worried about that, but I was more worried about the officer that was cowering down behind the pile of other officers trying to protect themselves. That's not their job. Their job is to protect the man on the stage, and that man on the stage at that time was Donald J. Trump, and they were not protecting him. And that iconic picture where he's saying, "Fight, fight, fight," that should have never happened, because you should have had somebody that was head and shoulders above, or above the height that they were, yet they were lower than him. And I'm not discounting those people's their bravery or their patriotism, but their physical ability to do that job in that situation, to me, is questionable.
Yeah, Congressman
We've
Burchett,
got to get past that.
We were showing that footage of the first assassination attempt as you were talking about it. You alluded to these quick fixes out there. Obviously, there's been no fix. So if you were in charge, how would you propose that we fix this problem?
I would bring in somebody from the outside that has been on the inside, that understands the program, like a Dan Bongino. I know it's controversial because he's a popular podcaster, and Dan's a buddy of mine. He makes very good sense about the culture. He's talked to people on the inside, mostly whistleblower types, that have told the problem that you've got in there and the people that you've got there. I just think it's a total different culture now, and I'm afraid some of these departments have gotten radicalized. And you have to wonder how these people know where to be that are trying to take the president out. That's a real question that needs to be asked, whether some in Congress have said that they think somebody on the inside is leaking this out, whether intentional or not. You know, a guy waited 12 hours out in the bush for Trump, and he should have never been there, ma'am. They should have had They should have picked him up on drone or something. I go to football games about every weekend, high school football games, and the drones they have are incredible. They can literally see the part in my hair, which really looks good this morning, by the way. Y'all haven't on that.
Well,
but the truth is, that we're not using all of our assets, and one of those assets is our brain.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's not being used.
Well, Congressman, you bring up an interesting point, because the American people have a lot of these similar questions that you have raised. And hearing you raise these questions, it is very disturbing that we don't have answers. And now we're at 2 attempts. And whether or not whoever that candidate is, this is, I think we can all agree on one thing, unacceptable. So how is the Secret Service responding now to these questions that you're bringing up? How are they responding to the whistleblowers that are coming up and really raising some disturbing scenarios here?
The usual Washington shuffle. They ask for more money, and then they say they don't need more money. It's both sides out of their mouth. And then they just don't answer questions, knowing that we'll move on to another bright, shiny object next week. And that's really what they're doing right now. It's very frustrating to me to watch these press conferences. And, and here's the other thing. Congress is, our duty within our scope of our job scope, I guess you would say, is funding. We ought to start cutting the funding out of some of these departments that are not doing their job, but yet we don't have the guts to do that and force their hand. And yeah, we'll do a study and we'll bring them in, and then we'll slap them on the wrist, and then eventually we'll say, well, we just need more money, and that's what it'll be. And they'll shame us into providing more money, and nothing will change. Nothing will change. And, that's what happens when you have 12% of the population getting out and vote, and 20 to 30 million evangelical Christians decide to stay home. This is what's going on in our country in every department. There's fraud, abuse, and misuse of your funds, and people ought to get mad. And right now they just take it, and I don't understand why.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of people probably have those sentiments as well. We've been focusing most of this conversation on the Secret Service, but what about these people who are acting out? I mean, literally within 9 weeks of each other, we have seen 2 attempts on a former president's life. Do you feel the rhetoric that's being put out there about the former president is contributing to this?
100%, ma'am. And I feel like you're hearing words that are triggering words. They're code, and they're being used by the far left, because you're not seeing a bunch of right-wingers shooting people up, shooting up schools. It's all far left. There's always, you dig deep enough. And the cover-up in the Main Street media, to me, is pretty evident. They talk about this latest guy didn't know his political leanings. Well, he had a Kamala Harris bumper sticker on his dadgum pickup truck. My goodness, what else is there? And they even in the pic, they show the picture of his house, and they said, we don't, know his political leanings. But then Hillary Clinton gets out and says really just awful things, and she knows that will trigger. People don't like Donald Trump. They wish he would. I honestly think a lot of people on the left wish that he was dead, because if you read some of the tweets by some of the people about how we need to, y'all need to learn how to sight your rifles in better, and you need to learn how to shoot, and things like that, to me, are evident. And by that not being shouted down by the highest levels of the Democrat Party, to me, that's just a green light.
Yeah, that's
just a green light. And you've got a group within the CIA. It was called MK Ultra. And they used psychotropic and psychedelic drugs, and to brainwash folks. And they went out in the 60s. They claimed they didn't exist, and then they went out, and then I think they got a lawsuit against them, and they had to admit that they existed. And then they said they don't exist anymore. Well, I'm not so sure that they do or they don't exist. I don't particularly trust any of our alphabet agencies right now, and I would look into something like that eventually, because we're going to have to start taking, because these code words that are put out at the highest levels, it's not by accident. And you'll see them repeated over and over and over again. And you all have seen it all.
Oh, absolutely. And I think the American people are asking those very same questions right now. We do know there is a very serious problem in this country, and hopefully we will get some answers. And Congressman, we thank you for pushing and not giving up on getting those answers for all of the American people.
Yeah, thank you for your time. Congressman Tim Burchett from Tennessee.